When did your something is very wrong here feeling turned out to be true? Airline pilot here. Warning, do not continue reading if flying makes you uneasy. One day we loaded up passengers and cargo and everything and we were ready to taxi. I noticed that the nose of the airplane seemed to be higher up than usual while we were sitting on the ground. I told my first officer about it and he agreed. We double-checked the weight and balance and everything seemed to be right. I decided to just taxi out towards the runway and see if the wheel struts would go back to their normal positions during taxi. They didn't. Still felt weird to me. Something wasn't right. I told ground control we needed to go back to the gate. Called ops and told them we're headed back because I think something isn't right with the weight and balance. After we get back, I asked them to check how much ballast we have in the aircraft. It's verified on my sheet as 500 pounds. But I have a feeling, turns out, yep, they forgot to put it in the plane. So had we taken off, the center of gravity would have been out of whack, way past limits. It could have resulted in an airplane that was impossible to control. Just like that 747 that took off and had the load slide to the back. That was a day that I was really pleased that I had so much experience flying to give me that feeling, and that feeling could very well have saved my life along with others. Edit. A lot of people are asking how 500 pounds could be an issue on a large aircraft. Not all airliners are that big. The incident I'm talking about in particular was on equipment with less than 40 passenger seats. Edit 2. Evidently that 747 crash was due to the load shifting and breaking the elevator control mechanism, not the actual load shift itself as I previously thought. Edit 3. Here is a link to a good weight and balance lesson for small aircraft that explains why aircraft need to be within the weight and balance limits. It might also help some understand why 500 pounds can make a big difference when it is placed in a particular spot on an aircraft. I was at a party when I was in college when two older dudes showed up. The place was packed and most people were drunk. I noticed something was a bit off about them. They never smiled and weren't really talking to anyone. Finally someone accused them of feeling around in their back pocket and it turned out they were lifting wallets from drunk college kids. Once confronted, one of the guys stabbed the kid in the stomach with a smallish knife. They left slowly and were never caught. It was pretty surreal. The kid who got stabbed turned out fine. Went for a weekend away with a group from my local scouting area, back in the 80s. I didn't know them all, went to make up the numbers and get some climbing, canoeing, caving done. We stayed in a rented house in the Peak District, UK. One evening, a few guys went out to try bouldering, climbing boulders 10 to 15 meters high. I got there, took one look and said no, we have no climbing gear, that's high enough to die falling from. I got the mickey taken, chicken, etc., so I left them to it and walked back. An hour later one guy fell 10 meters and split his skull open on the rocks below, killed instantly. Edit. Well, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. For those that asked, I can't remember exactly where it was now. It was over 30 years ago and I remember at the time it was difficult to find the house, especially in the days before sat-nav and mobile phones. It was down several windy country roads and then up a farm track. It was many years before I visited the area again and couldn't find the place at all, not even sure I was on the right road. I seem to remember it was near Castleton, as I think that was the town I walked down to after returning back to the house. And again, for those who asked, apart from one guy who I saw a few times over the years, I didn't see any of the others again. I wasn't called to the inquest and the group were outside of my normal group of mates. We had a serial killer in SC a couple years ago. No one knew what he looked like yet, but he had already killed 3 people at this point. Well, my granny has lived alone since my pawpaw passed about 15 years ago. She lives at the end of a long dirt road with about 10 other families, but the closest one was about a 1/4 mile up the road. One afternoon some random guy comes knocking on the front door of her house. My granny is a practical woman. She has never been to school because she grew up on a farm and was expected to pull her weight, but she is a smart woman. She goes to the door but doesn't open it. Glass door. The 40-ish-year-old man is there asking if he can use the phone since his car broke down. Granny doesn't like the look of this guy. If he doesn't live here, there is no reason for him to be on this road, and if he was visiting someone, their house or anyone else's house would have been closer since she lives on a dead end. Anyways, she tells him that no, he can't use the phone and needs to leave. She backs up and picks up my pawpaw's 410 as she goes. Once he sees the shotgun, he hightails it out of there. About a week later the cops finally catch the serial killer, and lo and behold, if it isn't the same man. When I was a little kid, I stepped outside to walk home from my neighbor's 2 doors over. I smelled what I knew was a bear, which are common where I live. If you've ever smelled a black bear, it's not that different from a skunk, which is what my friend's mom told me it probably was when I asked her to drive me home, even though my house was literally right around the corner. The thing is, a skunk smell is strong, but doesn't, like, travel. A bear smell is more permeating. Begrudgingly, she drove me, only to see the bear sitting on my back steps outside the door I would have tried to enter my house with. Black bears aren't that vicious, but my friend's mom apologized immediately about not believe me. Could have walked straight into that thing at the age of 12. This happened almost 30 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was probably 8 or 9 at the time and had been at the store buying candy for the weekend with a girl from next door. She was 1 year younger than me. A car stopped and the man inside opened the passenger door and asked me and my friend to get in the car. He was picking us up for our parents, he told us. I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong and remember thinking this is what my parents were talking about. I grabbed my friend's hand, said that we lived in that house right over there and pulled my friend with me. Went to their door, rang the bell, went straight in and told the people living there what had happened. Turned out I was right, we were about to be kidnapped. This was about 15 years ago. My parents went out for a nice dinner for their anniversary and decided that I was old enough and responsible enough to be left alone for a few hours on a weeknight. I was almost 9 and we owned a fairly protective dog at the time, so it all seemed fine. They leave, tell me to lock up and to call if anything happens. I do so and proceed to party around the house like a rock star, cause dude I had the whole dang house myself and I could do whatever I wanted. Hell to the yeah. Halfway through a Sailor Moon marathon, I get a knock on the door. I'm confused as all get out cause it's only been about 2 hours and they said they probably wouldn't be back till around 10 anyway. I guess mama has left something she needed again and swung by to grab it. My front door is a system of 2 doors, a super old, thick wooden door. The house was originally built in the 30s and this door is still the original piece, and then outside of that, at the time, a screen door. My dog is raising hell at the front door, but I just pulled her back to calm down. Cause she had a tendency to be reactive to most noises. Vailp, it's not my mom at the door, some middle-aged man I've never met before in my life. Puppo is now basically feral, so I keep the screen door firmly closed and a hand on her collar as I ask the man what he wants. He starts in on this weird convoluted story about how he has 2 young twin daughters and how they got into a fight and that one of them ran away. Now this man then claims that he believes his daughter is hiding in my house and would like to come look for her. I tell him no such girl is here and why does he think she would be here in the first place. He goes on into a long story about how this was the house they first lived in and how it's the one she was born in, and how it was like a safe place for her and would be the most likely place she would run away to as it was really the only other place she knows. So I felt kinda weird since I opened the door and this dude's story hasn't been helping his cause, but now I know something shitty is going down. I, in no uncertain terms, informed the guy that he must have the wrong house because this house was built and has been lived in by my family since its construction. My dad was born in that house and after my mom and dad told his parents that they pregnant with my older sister they gave it to them as a present to begin their family. He must be mistaken cause I know all this to be fact. Hell, there were pictures less than 10 feet away from me on the wall of my dad and uncle playing in the front yard in the late 70s. By now my dog is growling like crazy and dude is getting kinda agitated. He insists that I don't know what I'm talking about and that if I would just give him a few minutes to search for his daughter he could be on his way. The latch on the screen door was broken and I was putting all my strength at the time in holding my dog from the door. He opens the screen door with one hand and with the other reaches for my closest arm. My crazy cocker goes ballistic. Uses all her strength to lunge at him, gets a hold of his hand, and bites down. Now man is yelling and confused. He pushes back against the screen door and slams it shut to get my dog off of him. Sadie gets pushed back indoors but is still raging. I quickly slam the front door, lock it, and chain it shut. Run around the house and make sure all other doors and windows are locked and then hunker down in the bathroom hyperventilating and wait about 15 minutes till Sadie's growling has calmed some. Check outside, no man or his car. Both long gone. I call my parents and tell them they need to come home right now please. When they get home I recount the whole story. Dad goes to check the front door and sure enough on the screen door jamb and siding of the house is a large smear of blood. Sadie was treated like a queen and got a whole steak for her to eat on that weekend. An instance happened to me when I was around that age. Pops left me in the car while he went inside this convenience store. A van parks right next to our car. I'm in the back seat closest to them. Almost immediately they slide open the van door and start smiling at me and waving at me to come over. It was two guys and a woman. The woman was holding candy. I remember thinking they were way too excited to see me while being complete strangers. I got out of my seat and laid down the back seat until my dad came back. Never told him what happened or anyone else for that matter. A boy around my age had been abducted within the same year in a decently high-profile case. Made the national news. My mom had made me watch the newscast with her about how the boy had been abducted after Little League and told me to never talk to a stranger. Without that lesson I'd give I would have made the same choice. Not so much something very wrong here, but a bunch of my friends wanted to go to this party when I was like 20. I was just sort of like I really don't want to go to this place with these people. Turns out two of my friends got into an argument with people who lived there, got kicked out, were super hammered and drove home angry. Car flipped 3 or 4 times, wrecked about another 4 cars. My one friend leaves with a small concussion, the other leaves with like 8 broken bones and walking therapy for about 2 years. Best part is the emergency responders said if anyone was in the back seat they would be dead. That's where I would have been sitting. I work at a psych hospital. I was in the cafe with an adult unit and the adolescent unit was also there. I had known one of the kids from when she was on the children's and normally we had a good rapport. I went to say hi and told her I was proud she had been staying out of trouble. A few of the other girls reacted weirdly to me saying it and the girl looked guilty. I told the staff on the unit and said they should keep an extra eye on the girls because I had bad vibes about it. The staff kinda brushed me off. A half hour later 4 girls, including the one I knew, literally almost killed the 2 staff. One got her head bashed in and suffered brain trauma and the other staff was blinded in one eye. My grandparents were driving up a steep mountain road behind a logging truck, when my grandmother started having a mild panic attack. She just kept saying something's not right, pull over. We need to pull over, so my grandpa did and settled her down. After a few minutes she was fine and they kept driving. A mile or 2 up the road the load of trees had come loose and spilled off the truck. It was 1:30 am, raining. I was riding my motorcycle down a 4-lane road, 2 lanes each direction with a middle turn lane. I saw a car approach a stop sign, perpendicular to me, in the parking lot of a bar and thought to myself, he's going to turn left in front of me. I was going 45 miles per hour, let off the throttle and about 200 to 250 feet from him, he did exactly what I thought he was going to do, grabbed my front and rear brakes, back tire locked up and kicked out to the left. I had maybe 40 to 50 feet in which I would either high side in front of the car and likely be ran over, slam into the driver door or rear driver door, or jump off to the right in a tuck and roll fashion. I jumped and my motorcycle slammed into the rear driver side of his car. I had a couple scratches, bruises and a sore tailbone. But I wasn't ran over or hanging out in his back seat via glass window, thank God for spidey senses. My cousin was killed in a collision just like this almost 2 years ago. The driver of the pickup truck didn't have his lights on though. We later found out he was drunk, so my cousin wasn't able to stop. His girlfriend was on the back of his bike. My cousin went through the driver's door window, his girlfriend over the hood. Both of them, and the driver of the truck, were all killed instantly. A lot of people I know pay better attention to motorcycles now. Unfortunately it took the death of a good man to get there. I'm glad you're okay, your maneuvering and instincts were very impressive, but it's too bad you had to use them. Stay safe. A former co-worker, Jason, told me this story. Jason was working at a dock in China that looked something like this, and unloaded shipping containers from huge international cargo ships. A typhoon had just passed, and many of the inbound ships had been delayed for days due to the extreme weather. Once the weather cleared, there was a backlog of ships waiting to be docked and unloaded. To make matters worse, a tropical depression had just been upgraded to a tropical storm, and was expected to make landfall within 48 hours. It was organized chaos as the dock workers frantically tried to unload 3 times the volume of shipping containers in half the time. Jason was a senior cargo agent, and his job was to verify that the information on the offloaded shipping containers matched the information on the manifest, and to visually inspect shipping containers for damage. A cargo agent had to sign off on all cargo before an unloaded ship could disembark. As there were a limited number of spaces for ships to dock, it was crucial that the cargo agents verify the unloaded shipments as quickly as possible so that another ship could dock immediately. Everyone at the dock had walkie-talkie eyes, handheld portable two-way radios, and Jason heard dock manager 1 going absolutely apeshit because an unloaded ship had been waiting in the dock for nearly 2 hours, and no cargo agent had verified their delivery. Jason radioed cargo agent 1 assigned to that area, but there was no answer. He then radioed cargo agent 2, and still received no response. He then radioed the next closest senior cargo agent 1 and asked him to drop everything and verify the cargo immediately. After 30 minutes, dock manager 2 radioed that the ship was still docked. Jason then radioed senior cargo agent 1 who he had sent over there, and did not receive a response. He then radioed dock manager 1 who had been screaming into the radio, and again received no response. Jason was now the only senior cargo agent in the area, and it now fell to him to verify the unloaded shipment and get the delayed ship out of port ASAP. As he got into his truck to drive over, a nagging feeling of dread kept telling him not to go. He ignored the feeling and drove there anyway, all the while trying and failing to radio anyone else in the area. When he arrived at the unloading zone, he couldn't bring himself to get out of the truck, and later said that it felt as if he was being physically pushed back into his seat. Jason then picked up his radio with a shaking hand and broadcast, "Unknown threat near unloading section 4. All workers evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." And just like that, a multi-billion-dollar port was shut down. A hazmat team was soon dispatched, and found that a shipping container damaged in transit had been carrying heavier than air inert gas. The gas leaked and displaced the air, then became trapped between several rows of closely stacked shipping containers. Every person that approached immediately lost consciousness. 5 people were found dead near the damaged container, and Jason was later fired because he did not actually have the authority to shut down the port. Jason filed the Chinese equivalent of a wrongful termination lawsuit, but was strongly encouraged to settle, or else the Chinese government might find him partially responsible for the workers' deaths. As a white foreigner in China, this was a very real possibility, and he ended up settling for a modest amount. Jason still blames himself for the death of senior cargo agent 1, and gave the settlement amount to the man's widow. I work in the oil and gas industry in the US. Stop work authority is very serious stuff. Everyone has the authority to shut everything down at any time. When I put contractors through orientation before they work in my station, I explain stop work authority like this: you can stop work for any reason with no consequences and we will reevaluate the situation. You can say Holmfaster's face is unsettling and we will shut down. Explain that my face has no impact on safety, then resume work. Nobody's life is worth anything we do at work. If something can't be done safely while remaining within budget and deadline, then it's not worth doing. At a research institute, I walked into a mouse procedure/surgery room for a quick moment to grab something and leave. After walking out, I felt, well, to be honest, like I was a little high. There were 3 other people in that room, including 2 undergraduates, so I got worried and went back inside to check things out. When I got back inside, I asked if they were feeling okay. One of the undergrads turned to me and said she was fine, but was flushed and looked a little out of it. So I went around to all the isoflurane chambers, odorless volatile liquid that KOs mammals at low doses and kills them at higher, looking for leaks. Sure enough, the gasket at the bottom of one of the chambers had failed and it was leaking out and immediately boiling into a gas, and filling the room. I told them their isoflurane was leaking, and the postdoc told me they were fine and that he uses that machine all the time. He also pointed out that the isoflurane was in an air curtain biosafety cabinet, and so even with the leak they were protected. I called him an idiot, because a biosafety cabinet recirculates air and doesn't evacuate it like a fume hood, which is what he should have been using. So I ignored him, propped open the door, and ordered the undergrads to get out of the room. I then went to their lab manager and told her what I had found. My father started publicly dating a woman shortly after my mother died. I later learned she's likely the woman he'd been having an affair with before she died. I liked her. One evening my father took me to one side and asked how I'd feel about him asking her to marry him. I got an awful feeling in the pit of my stomach and felt nauseated. I told my father I didn't want him to, and he asked why, as he thought I liked her. I explained that he did like her but had a bad feeling, and he said that's just a feeling, they don't mean anything. He already had the ring and proposed straight away. I got really excited about the engagement, the wedding, moving house, and my impending little sister. After the wedding she changed. After my half-sister was born she went batshit. She abused myself, my full sister, my mother's child, and later my half-sister, her own child. He only left her when my doctor told him something was clearly going on with her that was affecting my health. She was putting a substance that I'm intolerant to in my food, and my father wouldn't believe me and would force me to eat whatever she made. However, I couldn't get a doctor alone without her to tell them, and my maternal grandmother told him if he didn't leave her she'd go for custody. That he finally left her. He accused me of lying for the entire time leading up to that and has never asked me about any of my attempts to get help since. Edit. I've gotten to the point of not knowing if my replies are disappearing or it's the same question being asked by a different person. Tomorrow's the last anniversary of my mother's death before I hit the age she was when she died, and I have plans with a friend this evening because I've been dreading tomorrow, my next birthday, the day I hit her age in days, and Halloween 2018 for ages. FAQs. I was 8 when my mother died, 10 when they married, 12 when we left. Sister was 3 when our mother died. Our mother died of an aneurysm, survived the first one but had a second in hospital. Half-sister is at university studying medicine. Social services were involved at points and made things worse. I waited until she was 18 to get counseling to avoid her going through that again. The access case was an issue and Stepm told toddler half-s if she spent the night at ours Stepm would die, so she eventually stopped coming at all. Stepm accused me of abusing half-s in the access case. I was terrified of going near that baby. Shortest example, I smiled. Stepm freaked out that I have an evil smile, picked up half-s and fled from the room. I don't know if half-s would welcome an attempt to start a relationship. Stepm married again. Beyond reproductive age, no idea if he already had kids. I gave my father a letter 9 years ago saying I'd have nothing to do with him until he put it in writing that he'd never use violence or threats of violence against me again. Still waiting. Abusers can be very charming. They wouldn't get anyone in a position to abuse them otherwise. They can be very capable of putting up a facade for people like social services, teachers, co-workers. The one I best remember was about 10 years back. I was a groomsman at a friend's wedding. Partway through the reception I was suddenly struck with a feeling of impending doom. They are going to play the chicken dance next. Frantically I started searching for someone, crying, "Let's go smoke. Who wants to go smoke?" I don't even smoke, but it wasn't hard to get a group together. When I came back, sure enough, the chicken dance had been danced, and I was the only member of the wedding party to escape its embarrassing talents. Edit. When I said wedding party I meant the bridesmaids and groomsmen, of which I was one. None of them made it out. Just me and a few dudes who'd sat in pews. Got off the subway at night. There was one other person about half a block behind me on my route home. This is a totally normal thing, has happened thousands of times. Totally normal looking dude, not even following me closely. I had a bad feeling, such a bad feeling that, when I turned the corner on my way home, I broke into a dead sprint and hid behind a dumpster in the shadows partway down the street. By the time he came around the corner, I was well hidden, and could see him from my hiding place. As soon as I saw his reaction to the fact that I wasn't there, I knew I had been right to hide. He started looking for me, muttering to himself. He went up and down the street, looked around corners. I hid and held my breath until he was gone. It was terrifying. I am so glad I had that sudden, inexplicable impulse to hide, and listen to it. I had a similar thing happen to me once. It's kind of hard to describe, but I live next to a 24-hour grocery store that's by itself in a big parking lot that I walk up a side alley and turn to the left to get to the front entrance. One night at 5 a.m. I walked over to it to get something. When I came back out of the store there was an old man waiting at a bus stop right out front next to the alley I had come from. For some reason I immediately felt weird and did not want to walk by him, at all. So I walked back into the grocery store. I waited 10 minutes before I decided to walk back anyway, thinking I was being silly. The man was gone, but I still felt really weird. That's when I remembered that the bus doesn't run for 2 hours. And since he never went into the grocery store I couldn't think of a single reason why he would have been waiting there. I just kept thinking, he was waiting for me, and even though he was gone I knew I could not walk back the way I came. Instead I walked in the opposite direction and up a hill before crossing over. When I looked down I could see in the alley I would have walked down, the man was hiding there, leaning against the wall, waiting for me. I now only go to that store during daylight. My sister was 18 years old and bought a horse from a guy who was married and 47. My parents liked the guy and became friends with him and his wife. I knew something was up because he and my sister would talk constantly on the phone. My mom actually asked his wife if that was cool and she said it was totally fine, and he did this a lot with other kids who needed horse advice. Yeah, my parents wanted to send my sister to stay with this guy for a whole summer so she could ride and show horses. I told them the relationship was clearly inappropriate and not to do it. They were like, if the wife doesn't mind then who cares? Within 2 months he had left his wife. Within 4 months they were engaged. 4 months after that they got married, and 1 week after that my sister was pregnant. This guy has had many parents accuse him of being a pedophile and coming onto their underage daughters. His own son has nothing to do with him. And he's not even good looking or rich. Just a gross, hideous hillbilly with leather for skin and 3 teeth. Good job, baby sis. 2 years ago, I was on my way back home on my bike. I had to go over a bridge, and on one side of the bridge, there was a girl, crying. On the bridge, 2 14-year-olds, one pretty tall, one pretty small, head to head, seemingly about to get into a fight. When I went by, they stood back. I thought something was off, but I told myself fighting among 14-year-olds over what I thought was a girlfriend is normal and not dangerous, right? Turns out, the taller one of the boys jumped off the bridge to commit suicide only minutes after I passed. The smaller one couldn't physically hold him back. Had I stopped, listened to my gut feeling, I might have been able to help and talk him out of it. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of attention. Some more info then. The kid was bullied and the girl and the other boy were his only friends. Bad family situation too. So he told his friends that he wanted to end it. They came to talk him out of it. They also called the cops and told them to come with sirens off. His friends managed to get him off the bridge, but then the cops arrived with sirens blaring. He ran from his friends and dived headfirst off the bridge. I do not have any issues with what happened. I don't see myself at fault. But sometimes, I do think, what if? On a recent date with my girlfriend, I couldn't place it, at all. She was herself, if not a little more playful. She looked like herself, in jeans and a hoodie. I just couldn't quite place it. Until we got home and it turned out she was wearing a strap-on harness all night. I have no idea how that was comfortable. Not me, but my coworker. She got a call last week that her sister-in-law didn't show up for work and didn't call or anything. She's been working 3 jobs recently and was complaining she needed a good night's sleep. Coworker said she probably slept through the alarm clock, but her husband insisted that she go home and check on her because it wasn't like the sil to just not show up for work. Coworker was annoyed, but did it since her house was only 20 minutes away. Coworker gets there and it turns out she had overdosed on some sort of opioid, and then had a heart attack. Oxygen levels were extremely low, and paramedics said that if coworker hadn't gotten home when she did, Sil would have been dead within minutes. Thank God her husband had felt that something was wrong. Always go with your gut. Edit. If anyone is curious, this happened last Wednesday. Today is Monday and this morning they finally let her out of the ICU and into an actual room. Her heart and liver were extremely damaged, but looks like they're on the mend. She had to undergo dialysis yesterday, and it seems to have helped her a lot. They tried to get her to stand up and walk to a chair on Saturday, but it did not go well and I don't think they've tried again yet. Her speech is a little slower than it used to be, but other than that it looks like she doesn't have any brain damage. With nobody knowing the timeline of when everything happened, they were very worried that she did some real damage to herself from having such low oxygen for an extended period of time. Once she can finally check out of the hospital, she will be going to rehab, even though co-worker and family believe this was only a one-time thing. Luckily she lives on the first floor of my co-worker's house, so if there are any long-term medical conditions, they will be around to help her. A year ago my elder uncle did not show up for work. He's older, unreliable type, and I assumed he got drunk and forgot. Something in my gut said to just go check on him. I arrived at his apartment building and the staff refused to let me inside. I was a bit frustrated, but they went upstairs and knocked on his door. No answer. They told me he was not home and I was not allowed to go inside. I then became pissed off but assumed I couldn't do anything but call the cops. How could I bother police to do a wellness check? He probably got drunk somewhere else and was sleeping at a friend's house. Instead of letting that thought deter me from checking on his well-being, I decided to search the area for his vehicle. I searched all the parking lots in the area. 3 different parking lots, each one with 4 to 5 floors of cars. No sign of his vehicle anywhere. I was still not giving up. I walked all the streets around his building to check for his vehicle. Finally, I found his car parked blocks away from the building. I ran back to the apartment building as quick as possible and demanded they open the door, because his car was near the building. I wasn't leaving until the management or the police opened the door. I dragged the maintenance person, property manager, social worker upstairs to his apartment and began banging on the door again. No answer. They all shrugged and I again demanded they open the door. As the maintenance man put the key in the lock, my uncle opens up in his tidy white tees. Everyone was pissed at me because they thought I was overreacting to a gut feeling. They all storm off pissed. I walk inside and began talking with him about missing work. He sounds groggy, like he just woke up. He keeps mumbling and then discovers he cannot speak properly. We are going back and forth for 5 minutes and I tell him if he can't pronounce his words properly he should go see a doctor immediately. He is hesitant but finally agrees. We walk downstairs, stroll to his car, and head to the hospital. As soon as we walk in the door of the hospital they rush him in the back. Within seconds we are surrounded by neurologists, doctors, and nurses plugging him into every machine possible. He suffered a severe stroke. My diligence might have saved his life, because he had not awakened since suffering the stroke over 12 hours earlier. Not me, but my mom, and I am doing my best to recall the story she mentioned to me a few months ago. My mom has been a psych nurse for over 30 years at a private hospital. One of the patients she was looking after was a very boisterous person in her 40s and she had been in the hospital for over a week. One night Mom noticed this lady was very lethargic, saying that she was just feeling tired and was going to have an early night and to get her meds early. This isn't going where you expect. Mom thinks this is very odd for this lady, but everyone has off days and so she gives this lady her medication and she goes off to bed. About 5 minutes passes and Mom still has a knot in her gut about this lady, and thinks she will just check her stats, so she goes to her room, where the lady is just about to lay down and checks her blood pressure, pulse and oxygen saturation. This is pretty rarely done in a psych hospital unless people have other health concerns needing monitoring. This lady's oxygen saturation was down to around 80% I believe, doing the best to recall. To put it in perspective, if it falls below 92% your cells can absorb oxygen and this can cause permanent damage. Mom in her over 40 years of nursing, wasn't always a psych nurse, has never seen someone with such a low level. She checks again and the same result. Mom calls an ambulance and gets this lady on oxygen. Later that night Mom gets a call from the hospital the patient was sent to, from the doctor who lets Mom know that the lady is fine. She had a blood clot. If she had been left for another 15 minutes the doctor is certain she would have died. The lady made a full recovery and gave Mom a beautiful scarf the next time she saw her. A guy came to the door one day, looking for my mom. I was probably 13 at the time. Immediately, I had most of my body behind the door, ready to shut it. I just had this awful feeling about him. He said he hadn't seen her in a long time, and that he was just coming from church and was in the neighborhood. Okay. So this guy is trying to communicate that he's a good person, and that in his weird smile just made me trust him less. I told him my mom was napping. She wasn't. She was at work. So, he left a note for her with his name and number on it. I took it and closed and locked the door. Then I looked at the note and immediately recognized the name. It was my uncle. I hadn't seen him since I was 5, when he went to jail for murdering my aunt and cousin. Several years ago on Thanksgiving my mom was becoming extremely overwhelmed. The holidays have never been a great success in my family and my parents had issues communicating which led to a lot of stressful intense dinners, and if it wasn't them it was someone else starting a fire. Well, this year was bad. My mom had been cooking for hours to get ready to head over to my cousin's house. My dad was yelling about how we spent too much money on the holidays. It got to a point where my mom told me and my brothers to leave for the party ahead of them. We didn't get far from the house until a really bad feeling started sinking in my stomach. I knew my brothers felt something too. I said, "Can we go back?" And my older brother turned around immediately. When we got there my father was gone. He had left out of anger and my mom yelled at him to leave. My mother was in her bed, laying still with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her. She was still conscious when we came in but started shaking and was falling asleep. We called 911. I later learned that the pills she had taken would have only put her to sleep for a long time, not actually kill her, but clearly it was her intent. She had severe depression, and after this she got some real help. I went to a Catholic grade school in the 70s and 80s. We had a priest that was very friendly with the students and much loved. He used to play pickup basketball with the players on the basketball team. We were playing after hours, and afterward he invited us to the rectory. He was drinking beer, was joking and swearing, and told us not to tell anyone. I was only in 8th grade, but this felt wrong. I find out years later, he was raping the altar boys, and the Catholic Church knew it and covered it up. Once the scandal blew up, he ran off to Mexico and killed himself. My friend asked me for a ride home. I told him I wasn't going his way, and he was like, "Okay, I'll catch a ride with those people." I wasn't a huge fan of the people he was going to go home with, so I said FCK it and gave him a ride. Turns out the kids who were going to take him home decided to speed down a windy, wooded road near his house at 80 miles per hour. They hit something and flipped the car multiple times. They all lived, but barely. The EMTs said that if they were bigger kids, they were all scrawny and under 5 feet 10 inches, they would have been crushed. My friend who almost went with them is 6'2". He absolutely would have died that day. Went on a high school field trip for a couple of days, and the first day we had a barbecue. There was chicken and I didn't trust the other kids to make sure it was done well, so I passed up on it. Next day 15 people had salmonella, ruining their entire trip. Might fall under logic instead of instinct though. Couple years ago we had a young dog, about 1.5, who had epilepsy. Of course, we had to give him meds multiple times a day to help with it. One day he basically just stopped eating. After a day or two I told my parents that we should take him to a vet. No, he'll get over it. About a week later he's still not eating, and we take him into the vet for a periodic checkup. Turns out he has liver failure that is almost guaranteed to progress into heart failure. We ended up having to put him down a couple of days later, simply because we didn't want him to suffer. I told you, Mom. Attractive girl used to stare at me in the dining hall freshman year. But something about her just screamed insane. Now I'm a senior and my buddy banged that girl for about a month. Now she randomly shows up at his apartment and will sleep on their couch even after he told her he didn't want anything to do with her. Not so much a bad feeling, but I think it feels appropriate. I was a freshman in high school going out for football for the first time. I'm pretty average, probably on the scrawny side. About 2 weeks into practice I started having terrible back pain. I told my mom, who said, "Oh, you're just sore, suck it up," so I did for a while. I kept going to practice for another week before I finally had to tell my mom she can take me to the hospital or I will go without her. So she sets up an appointment, and turns out I had slightly broken a vertebrae. Tiny cracks on each side of the same vertebrae. Safe to say I don't take her advice much anymore. Pretty simple one. Went to a party that was just shoulder to shoulder packed from the moment I arrived. I could barely move through the house. People were spilling out onto the lawn and everybody was acting a fool. Way too many people there, and I figured shit was about to go downhill fast. So I grabbed my friend and we bounced. As we were leaving, about 10 to 12 police units passed us on the road headed towards the party. City, county, and state police, small town, so they probably asked for help. Found out later the party got shut down, obviously, and the police painstakingly ID'd everybody there. Arrested everybody involved with throwing the party because of underage drinking, arrested everybody that was underage, found a shitload of drugs and arrested people for that, and ended up towing a shitload of cars because nobody was sober to drive. Even people that were fine to leave didn't get to leave for hours. We just took our asses to a bar and drank like normal adults. We were at a party at a friend's place. He had a new colleague he had befriended attend. Something about this new dude just screamed insane to me. And the more he conjured up crazy racist conspiracy theories and went on about prophecies, the more I was concerned. Next day I said to friend, "Don't be near this dude, he's nuts." Couple of months later he slit his girlfriend's, who was also in attendance at said party, throat outside in broad daylight, and then turned the knife on his own neck when bystanders prevented his suicide. Last I heard he was in prison. My oldest daughter, 30-something, stopped by my work one day and introduced her new boyfriend. He seemed a little off to me, but I decided it was just guy dating my daughter and let it go. Later, he met my wife and she told me later that he seemed off to her, too. She has pretty good instincts about people, so we decided to investigate him a bit. Typing his whole name into Google, the first result was a mugshot from a couple of years ago. The third was an active warrant. More searching resulted in finding 3 warrants from different counties, an extensive record, check deception, theft, driving while suspended, driving after a lifetime suspension, and driving while a habitual traffic offender, and a brand new marriage license for him and my daughter. They were going to get married later that week. We, of course, told her about him, but she insisted that he'd already told her about all of that and had taken care of it. We emailed links to her roommate, who showed her, but she didn't have any luck talking her out of the relationship. They were in love, and everything would work out okay in the end. We sent in an anonymous tip, and he was arrested the next day at her apartment. My daughter then found out that he'd been lying to her about pretty much everything. He had entangled her in a business he was trying to start that mostly involved her financing things for him, because his credit was trashed due to records for bounced checks and theft. She's still working to untangle herself from that. He is still in jail, and, according to her lawyer, will be for at least 2 years depending on what happens in 2 other counties. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Byward Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 am and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday, but as we walked behind them for a few minutes we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her, and her clutch was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions: what bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa U student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all the same seemed really uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and dropped her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took out her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational while the other went silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she had been dosed, and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff. I was climbing and cutting a dead tree, box elder, also known as an ash maple. It was wedged between 2 houses, so I had both neighbors splitting the bill and they were all out in the yard watching me. The wind was high and I was moving around a lot in the canopy, about 60 feet up. It was beyond seasick levels of sway, but I'm used to worse. I don't know what it was exactly that was tipping me off subconsciously. Maybe it was something about the sound of the wood creaking that seemed off to me. Maybe when I was climbing my spurs were making the wrong noise. The wood definitely felt solid. I never hit a mushy spot on the way up. The plan was to top it out and slide down the main stem, lowering limbs with rigging, and then flop the pole nice and neat. Everything seemed routine, but I kept getting goosebumps and it was creeping me out. I wish I could say I had a real clue, but there weren't any signs of trouble, nothing obvious, but there it was, that horrible feeling of fear. Like, that feeling which is so physical it makes you keep questioning your bladder every 5 seconds. I didn't always trust my gut, but, having been taught that lesson enough times in life, I tend to go on high alert nowadays. To the point where I'm nearly superstitious. So, I just unhooked my lanyards and came down. Justified it by thinking, well, it's probably time for lunch anyway. It wasn't even close, it was like 9 AM. I gave an excuse, packed up the truck and went home. I remember I called my old mentor, whose wife had just given birth, just to talk to him and see how things were going. He started talking about his baby, and about how his little brother had been born premature, and they were worried about that happening. Then he rambled off on a tangent, mentioned the time his brother broke his back when a Douglas fir decided to barber chair on him while he was tied in about 20 feet up. Said neither of them saw it coming. Only thing that saved him was quick work on the part of their crane operator. I ate, showered, and having run out of excuses, I finally went back. Bucked all the limbs, and cut the top off, but that fear of the barber chair was ripe. I couldn't shake it. So, I went the extra step of using my 5/8 THS line, one of my strongest rigging ropes, holds 26 K plus, to marl the base of the trunk up to about 30 feet. It was a massive waste of time, but whatever, once the quote is accepted, I'm not working hourly, so who cares, right? Sure enough, when we went to bring the pole down, it splintered and popped open like it was only being held together by spit and chewing gum. If we hadn't reinforced it with serious mummy wrapping, it would have hospitalized either me or my groundsman, and then done God knows how many tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage to the clients' houses. I wish I could say I learned something about tree assessment from that experience, but I didn't. It just gave me one more in a long list of examples of why I absolutely have to trust my gut, and take every precaution I can. I think the vast majority of the data processing our brains do, is entirely subconscious, and there's just no way for us to ever make that a conscious process without turning ourselves into autistic savants. So the best we can do is not ignore it. A friend was avoiding me, and my now ex-girlfriend was acting a little suspicious the whole day. I just knew something did not add up and decided that I needed to know what was happening. I gave my buddy a call and told him, so I spoke with, insert name of X, today, and she told me something weird. Care to explain? He confessed, and I had to, friend, break up with them. My sister was sick with lupus and it got worse and worse. One night I walked past her room and had an eerie feeling that this was her last night. It was. She passed away last Friday at 18 years old. Edit, thanks for all the support and love. I never knew some place like Reddit can have such a positive impact on what I am dealing with. I would love to share this with my family and folks I know, but they can't understand how the internet works. Everyone's encouraging words has filled me so completely, it is just what I needed. Christmas 2006, my girlfriend and I are at the mall Christmas shopping. I'm of the mind to get my father a watch as he hadn't had one in a while. We literally hit every store in that mall and I couldn't land on one to buy him. Hours spent in nothing. It was about a 45 minutes drive home and my GF is frustrated with me. Why couldn't I pick one? What was going on? I pulled the car over and started crying. I couldn't explain it. I told her I don't know why I'm crying and I don't know why I can't pick a watch, but I don't think he's going to be around long enough to use it. Why buy a watch if he doesn't have much time left? Ended up finding one and we had a great Christmas. In the last week of March, 3 months later, he got sick. Turned out to be a MRSA infection and he passed away March 31st. I walked into his hospital room after the DRS failed to revive him, to say goodbye. The watch was on the windowsill and I grabbed it as I walked out, and in the hall I remembered the premonition. My mom was supposed to take me and my sister to the Natural History Museum in 2005 since we lived just outside London and it was only a short tube ride. However, on the day she had a horrible feeling, so we stayed home and watched movies instead. That was the day of the 7/7 bombings. It was late 2012, at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. A sandstorm blew in, dark and foreboding, across the base. I looked across the airstrip at the new aircraft hangars under construction, and could have sworn, through the gritty sandy haze, that I saw one sway ever so slightly, but I had goggles on, the sand was everywhere, and I was driving a K-loader down the runway at the time. I figured I was imagining it, and anyway I had more important shit to focus on. Next day I get up and catch my ride to the airfield, and sure enough that huge steel frame they'd been building for months had collapsed in the night. Just a massive pile of steel beams and sand. My sister once called me downstairs to talk to my dad on the phone. At that time that was pretty regular, maybe once a week, and it wasn't at all an unusual time for it or anything. But my stomach dropped, I wanted to be sick, and I really did not want to answer. Turns out my grandfather, who I liked very much, had passed away very unexpectedly. I still don't understand what it was. I got nothing from the reactions of my family because he wanted to tell me first, and it started before I saw any of them. There had been no news, medical or otherwise, about my grandfather beforehand. My severe back pain was misdiagnosed for about 6 months and I knew something was seriously wrong. I finally was able to get an MRI and they found a tumor about 1.5 to 2x the size of a softball on my spine. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story, since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward first date, and around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area, so the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars and started hiking under just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsings of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again, and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon, and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. I had this feeling of dread watching my twin sister walk down the driveway to get in the car and visit her boyfriend a couple towns over. I knew she shouldn't go. It stormed, my mother insisted she try to make it home, she tried, and she flew off the icy turnpike in the middle of the night. She was absolutely fine and believes me about my spidey sense now. When I was in high school I had gone to a party with some friends. From the moment we got there, something felt off. I bugged my friends to leave and tried to explain that something just felt off. Well, I was able to bug them for us all to leave by bribing them with steak and shag. We found out the next day that a bunch of police came about 15 minutes after left and arrested most of the kids as well as a group of guys who were caught raping a girl while she was passed out drunk. So glad we got out of there. A couple of years back, I got a stomachache. I'm not normally prone to them, so it felt a little strange. When the pain moved to my side, I knew something was wrong, so I called the doctor, who called me in for an emergency appointment. I was worried it might be appendicitis. He agreed. I got there, got prodded and poked and told there was nothing wrong with me. If it was really your appendix, you wouldn't be able to sit there and talk to me. Fair enough, so I went home. Later that night, I start throwing up, so I knew something was wrong, so off to the hospital. The complete BTCH of a doctor prodded and poked around again and declared it was just a stomach bug, or maybe a urine infection, told me to drink some flat Coke, and go to the doctor in the morning. Bear in mind, I'm so pale as to be actually gray by this point and can barely hold down any more than a couple of sips of water. Later in the morning, I'm still not feeling right, so I get my so to take me to the doctor again. More of the usual prodding and a well, it's probably an infection, but I'm going to refer you to the hospital, just in case. So I get to the hospital. Long story short, I have a whole bunch of tests, but they're still not convinced it was appendicitis. I was, by this point. They eventually agree to do an appendectomy, using keyhole surgery, so I go down for the op, which they reckon will take an hour or so, and don't be surprised if you still have an appendix when you wake up. We're going to have a look first. I woke up about 6 hours later with a 4-inch incision on my side with a tube sticking out of it rather than the 3 small holes I'd been told to expect. I asked the nurse what the hell happened, and got, "Oh yes, your appendix was really bad, apparently. I think it burst as they were removing it." So yeah, not only did I have appendicitis like I thought, but I had it really bad. I ended up in the hospital for another week being treated for sepsis. When I was doing my PhD, I got offered the chance to go to the Central European University summer school program to do a course that would have been extremely valuable. I even got offered a full scholarship to do the course, and free accommodation, etc. Really amazing deal. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, I said to my boyfriend at the time, "Something is telling me I shouldn't go." And I was like, WTF brain, This is the opportunity of a lifetime. But the don't go feeling kept getting stronger. So I withdrew from the course, feeling stupid for doing it. The day after I was scheduled to leave, my perfectly healthy mom got sick. A week later she was in a coma. A week later we had to turn off life support. Her funeral was a week after that. I would have been away in her last waking moments. I heard a strange noise when I woke up. I looked outside my bedroom window to see if anything there made that noise and saw my oldest cat sitting on the windowsill outside of the other bedroom. She was staring into the room as if there was something in there that she did not like at all but could not look away. At that moment I knew there was something, or someone in the other room. Then I heard the noise again. It was like a soft squeaking, like someone shifting his weight from one foot to another on a wooden floor. I don't have wooden floors. I told myself there could not be an intruder in that room. It makes no sense that someone could get in there without waking me up, and I gathered my courage and went to check it out. When I got to the doorway I saw two of my other cats in the hallway staring into the other room, very agitated. I peeked around the corner and heard the squeaky noise again. It was one of my neighbor's cats. Very afraid and being trapped on my desk by my cats. Registered nurse here. They pretty much tell us straight off the bat in nursing school to trust our guts. We're allowed to call a rapid response team, people who come when something very bad is happening to a patient, if the patient just doesn't look right to us. I got my job right out of nursing school in a department that deals with mothers and babies right after delivery. I was 22 years old, had no children of my own, and my only experience with newborns was my last 6 months on the job. I had this patient and her baby who both seemed to be doing well. The baby's weight, vital signs, and intake and output were all normal, but I felt like something wasn't right. For one thing, I had never heard this baby cry. Anyone who has ever been anywhere around newborns know that they can pretty much cry at the drop of a hat, for anything, at any time. This baby didn't cry when I put her on the scale to weigh her. They usually cry like you're actively trying to kill them, or when I pricked her heel for a blood sugar. I felt like a total idiot because I had almost no experience with newborns, but I decided to talk to someone anyway. I brought the baby to the nursery nurse, who has had over 20 years experience in the department, and told her that I thought something was up. The baby looked fine. Her vitals, including her blood sugar, were perfectly normal. However, the baby was floppy, not a technical term, but used to describe a baby when its arms and legs aren't curled up tightly next to the body like they're supposed to be. This baby's arms and legs were limp and stretched out. She had a poor grasp. She didn't tighten her fingers around our fingers like newborns are supposed to do, and when we could get her to cry, we barely could. Her cry was weak. The nursery nurse agreed that something was wrong and called the neonatologist, newborn baby doctor, who was on call that night. She spent about 20 minutes on the phone just trying to tell him that something wasn't right, even though everything was technically normal. Luckily, the neonatologist trusted her judgment and had us send the baby to the NICU. That baby ended up staying in NICU for about a month, being tube-fed because she stopped eating well. They did genetic testing on her and discovered that she had been born with a pretty rare, only 30,000 cases diagnosed annually in the US, genetic disorder that usually isn't diagnosed until the baby is unable to sit up on their own at about 6 months of age. The disorder has no cure, but doctors were able to start treatments on her in order to manage some of the symptoms almost immediately. Christmas Day 2016, my family and I had packed the car with all the goods and were about to be on our way to my grandparents' house. The car wouldn't start. Let's back up. The whole day I felt I was in a trance or a dream. I kept feeling off, and the night before I had a dream that we were driving on a bridge. Our tire popped, we slid and a car slammed into my side of the vehicle. I remembered it so vividly because I see the headlights coming at me in my head still. I get prophetic dreams a lot, but I really didn't think much of it because I also suffer from nightmares. Anyways, we call AAA. Meanwhile I'm refusing to get in the car because everything feels off. The guy gets there, tells us it was our battery so he charged it. I still felt very off, but seeing as he fixed the problem I get in, he turns around and says to my mom, "I just wanna check your tire pressure for some reason." Not kidding, he said one of the front tires was extremely high, wasn't I? Quote from AAA dude. About to pop if we were to drive, especially on a highway or turnpike. He fixed that too, free of charge. The feeling of being uneasy and dreamlike faded and I felt fine. Made it to grandparents' house. Awesome mashed potatoes. I know when to trust my gut. Edit. Seems a lot of people are twisted up in the prophetic dreams part. I call them prophetic because I don't know how to explain them. The car crash one was the first to seem like it could have actually been a warning, so I just added that in with my gut to say my gut was right. I don't mean I can see the future because I don't believe that. I just meant sometimes I get dreams and when I wake up I'm in a dissociated state until something about said dream happens, but it's mainly nonchalant things. Nothing like I saved everyone because of my future seeing dream. Sorry if it sounded like I was almighty, that's so Raven. I was at a bar in October of 13 or 14 if I recall. Anywho, I lived in a particularly rough neighborhood at the time, and I was enjoying a few drinks and such. A day before Halloween night, I had this horrible feeling of uneasiness looming in the back of my mind, so I told my buddies I'm turning in for the night. They called me the following morning and informed me that the bar had gotten shot up and like 3 people were injured. It was about 2 hours after I left if I recall. A few years ago, about 1 a.m. Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I live in a rough neighborhood and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the app building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were 3 people whom I quickly identified as male. Right away my reaction is to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection I see 2 of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they are headed home after a night of heavy partying and they are just helping their friend get sick or something. I am telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought that was odd and no good, so I dragged my dog straight back to my building. I don't even know if he got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed and thinking nothing more of it. Until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening because a dead body had been found. So, this wasn't a friend of theirs after all. They were ditching a body. Still upsets me today and I will never ignore my intuition again. I'll throw out an opposite one. This was in the late 1990s. Boarding a flight from Dallas to Denver, TWA, on IMD 80. It's evening. The women behind me are clearly worried about flying and it's annoying me, so I grab a book and read to distract myself. No electronics on takeoff then, remember? Anyway, we take off and pretty quickly after we take off the plane slows down and the flight attendant gets up from the back and scurries to the front. The ladies behind me are again panting that's not normal. And I'm just rolling my eyes. You always slow down a bit after takeoff. My gut says we're cool. Then after about 2 minutes the plane executes a really sharp turn and the pilot comes on the announcer. Okay, this isn't normal now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're returning to the airport, please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Quiet for a bit and then he comes on again to tell us what happened. We lost an engine. This happens all the time. Oh, and you may notice a few emergency vehicles on the runway, but that's just normal procedure. As we land I see what looks like every single fire truck at DFW lined up beside the runway. We land without major issue, people clap, and then the pilot breaks us the real news. So I've trained for that many times in a simulator, but it's a once-in-a-career experience for a commercial airline pilot. So my gut was wrong. I was sure there was nothing wrong and there was. My friends and I went on a booze run one night back in college. We live in Flint, and we're at a friend's house in a relatively bad neighborhood. We had our friend who was 21 go in while the rest of us waited, yay underage drinking. As we're sitting in the parking lot we notice a dude standing by the trunk of his car a few rows of parking spots ahead of us. I had a bad feeling about him, so I was watching him the entire time while my friends were all chatting it up and laughing. I noticed my other friend who was driving watching too. Sure enough, after watching us for a second, he pops the trunk, pulls out a pistol, and starts walking towards us. We noped out and floored it around the parking lot right as our friend came outside, yelled for him to get in, and sped off. Turns out, there had been a ton of carjackings in that area over the last few months. A storm was gathering as my dad was driving. I was 8, sitting in the back and looking out the window. I told him, "You better hurry, that construction crane looks like it might topple." Everybody laughs at the idiot kid. That evening the whole family was watching the local news. They opened with that crane crashing down due to heavy wind. Although nobody had been hurt, I felt vindicated. Leaving a family camping trip. Something felt wrong before I left. I ignored it. Still, it was bugging me, and it was dark, so I drove slower than normal. Turn a curve, and there's this deer standing in the road. Just standing there, staring at a huge ass field of soybeans. Even driving slower, I didn't have time to stop. Wrecked my hood, busted my radiator, and cracked my windshield. This buck was huge. Like fat huge. If I'd been driving faster, it could have done more damage or even injured or killed me. Perks of the country life, yo! I was sitting down to lunch with a couple of friends while we were all still in college. We had just got out of line at Chick-fil-A in the student commons when I felt this awful prickling sensation all down my back. Promptly I told my friends to pack it and that we could walk up the concourse to my place and eat there. They obliged, and as we were walking out, about 9 or 10 cops walked past us into the same building to begin evacuation due to a bomb threat. I used to own a cat. It was a stray that came to us for food and affection. We've had multiple strays like this, but this one was different. A year after she first came to us, she got hit by a car. We found her and took her inside, which we didn't allow first. She recovered and you could tell she was so grateful. We had her for another 4 to 5 years until last year. About a year ago I woke up from a sound outside my window. There is a big farm a bit further up the street, so it's not unusual for trucks to drive by in the middle of the night. But that day I had the feeling that this sound wasn't a truck. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night because of this feeling, and the first thing I did the morning after was look outside if I saw something. There was nothing, but all day long I was stuck with this feeling something was not right. When my dad came home that evening I asked him if he saw the cat. He did not. About an hour after he called me and said these exact words, "I think we have a problem." That moment I knew. He found the cat in behind our house hiding for the rain under a metal plate. It couldn't walk anymore, but it still lived. My dad took her to the vet and left it there so they could take some pictures and do some tests. Only 20 minutes after he came home they called already. It appeared her spine got cut in two and the bottom part of her body got totally FK'd up. There was nothing they could do. My dad told me there was nothing I could have done. But only if I had searched better that morning, that it shouldn't have spent that whole day alone in the rain. I feel so guilty for that. I always tell myself I'm a dog person, but I love that cat. I haven't really told this to anyone since it happened, and it feels good to finally share this. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.